looking at the latest in barrier technology here at the Ford Crash Center in Dearborn, Michigan. This wall weighs 1.2 million pounds and it's worth $4 million. And it can give the technicians crash data within 30 minutes compared to 4 days. Now, if only they could discover what's wrong with our vehicles in that amount of time. But hey, that's why we got Bill Gardner.
This week I want to talk about starter motors, that little electric motor that lives underneath your engine and cranks over that great big engine on a really cold morning with relative ease. Now, here's the location of the starter motor on most vehicles. There is the odd vehicle where you can see the starter motor from the under hood area, but in most cases you're going to be underneath the vehicle like we are right now in order to view the starter motor. Now, in just about all cases they're bolted to the engine or transmission right where the engine and transmission intersect, because the starter pinion, the small gear inside the starter, has to mesh with this great big ring gear that we refer to that is on the flex plate or flywheel of the engine. Now, those two mesh when you turn the key, and it allows the starter motor to crank the engine over. Now, I've hooked up a jumper wire to this starter motor so that I can get it to crank from underneath here. And that's what's going to happen when you turn the key in the morning. Starter pinion intersects with this ring gear, cranks the engine over. Now, I've moved the inspection cover aside so that you could see this area here, and that's exactly what happens when you crank that thing over in the morning. Here's a typical starter motor we've removed from the car, mounted in the vise, and I've hooked it up to a battery over here via some booster cables. Now, when I hook up my jumper wire to this one, you're going to see the starter motor engage. That's what it would do in the car. The starter pinion kicks forward and engages with this area here where our flywheel is located, and it would begin to crank the engine over. Now, in order to do that, the solenoid up here has a lot to do with that. It not only electrically connects the battery to the starter motor, but in this case it also mechanically kicks the starter drive into engagement with the flywheel. Now, in most cases the solenoid is either integral or mounted on the starter in this fashion, with the exception of Ford products which are mounted remotely on the fender. Now, down inside the front of the starter here is this assembly here we refer to as the drive or pinion assembly. There's the pinion gear meshing with the flywheel, and there's an overrunning clutch in this assembly that allows it to freewheel in one direction and lock up in the other, so that if you accidentally forget to or release the key once the engine's going, you won't overspeed and destroy the starter. Now, in this area here, the starter motor is basically just a 12-volt DC electric motor with brushes, bushings, field coils, etc. Everything you'd expect to find in an electric motor. Now, next week I want to show you a little bit different slant on starter motors, and that's what we refer to as a gear reduction starter that's allowed engineers some flexibility in a couple of areas. Till then, I'm Bill Gardner for Motoring 96.